right, good afternoon. We are live with homestead exemptions. Cece, if you want to go ahead, we have attorney Stacy Reynolds here to talk to you all about homestead exemptions today.
Okay, thank you, Sally. So I'm Stacy Reynolds. I'm an attorney in the Senior Citizens Law Project of Atlanta Legal Aid, and I appreciate you tuning in. Atlanta Legal Aid is a nonprofit law firm, basically. We represent people on a wide range of issues. My unit, the Senior Citizens Law Project, is actually a unit that helps people who are 60 or over, and we actually have a senior legal hotline that screens calls from all over the state of Georgia. So it's a great resource. This is a general presentation about Georgia law, and it may not directly apply to the facts of your case. Every case is different. I'm going to talk mostly about sort of general Georgia law. For specific legal advice, you must contact an attorney for an individual consultation. This presentation does not create an attorney-client privilege. This is Georgia specific. Again, we're talking about homestead exemptions in the state of Georgia, and I'll be focusing on Georgia law, but then also sort of referencing county and city things. So let's get into it. We're talking about ways to lower your property taxes. And there are basically two ways to do that. One is homestead exemptions and property tax appeals. Today, we're really going to focus on the homestead exemptions piece of things. In order to understand how these two things lower your property taxes, you need to understand how property taxes are calculated. So basically, you start out with a total value, and the tax assessor is going to figure out what they think the total value of your home is. From that, they're going to tax you on a percentage of that. Generally, it's 40%, but some places vary. So they're going to tax you on a percentage of that, which is your taxable value or the assessed value. From that taxable value, they subtract any exemptions that you're eligible to get, or that you're approved to get. And then whatever is left over, they multiply times the millage rate, which is basically a fancy word for tax rate. And that's how they get how much you pay in taxes. Where the exemptions are higher than the taxable rate, then you'll actually end up with zero taxes owed. So, that's kind of the goal. So again, the two places that you can lower your tax bill is by trying to make sure that the tax assessor's value is as low as possible, and then increasing the exemptions you get as high as possible. So again, we're going to really focus more on the exemptions piece of things today. We're going to talk about the kinds of exemptions that are out there, why it's important to get these exemptions, who might be eligible for them. And I'm going to probably dig in a little bit more on that than normal, because that's a place where I really feel like there are more people who are eligible than who are actually getting them right now. And so we want to make sure that people know that they're eligible. We're going to talk about the proof that you need to show that you're eligible. We're going to talk about the deadline for applying for homestead exemptions and appealing a denial. We have time. I also have a couple of screens about, kind of the general timeline of taxes and tax foreclosures, but I really want to focus mostly on the homestead exemption today. So the kinds of exemptions. There is a basic homestead exemption in Georgia law that is available for anyone who's any homeowner that, regardless of their age or income or anything like that. So there's a basic exemption that's just out there waiting for you. There's also some additional exemptions for people who are 62, 65, for a disabled veteran or their unremarried surviving spouse or minor children, the unremarried spouses of U.S. service members, peace officers, firefighters who are killed in the line of duty. All of those can get some additional exemptions. So those are on top of the basic exemptions. Now, a lot of these do have income guidelines, but keep in mind that the income that they're talking about is not counting a big chunk of income. So most of them don't count Social Security or the retirement income and that sort of thing. So there are a lot of things that they're excluding. It's worth looking into whether or not you are eligible, regardless of what the income guideline is. Now, those are the ones that are available by Georgia law. There are also a lot of additional exemptions that you can get from your city or your county. So you want to be sure to check with your local governments to see what exemptions are out there. Also, a lot of them have adopted what they call a a floating exemption, which can also be called a value cap. And that can be a really huge benefit. I had to sort of do the math to figure out that the floating exemption really is a value cap. The way those work is they lock in a certain base year. And that base year is going to be the taxable value, plus that'll creep up each year, but it probably will not creep up in the same way that the home sale values do. There is not going to have that huge, 150% spike. It's only allowed to go up a certain amount each year. The one in Fulton County is 3%. So it could go up less than 3%, but it's never going to go up more than 3%. So it's going to cap that value with no more than 3% per year increase. So that can actually end up being a huge benefit in lowering the taxes, but it does not necessarily apply to all categories of taxes. So what that means is that you still have to pay attention to what the assessor has as the total value for your home, because if you don't appeal that, if you don't try and keep that as low as possible, there are some categories that are still going to be hit with those huge increases. So here's an example of how the homestead exemption can help you. So this is actually a City of Atlanta, Fulton County tax bill for someone who's getting all the senior exemptions. So you can see they're already getting a huge benefit from these senior exemptions back in 2018. It basically zeroes out her county taxes. It lowers the amount of her city taxes. It's, doing its job. Well, then in 2019, Fulton County adopted that floating exemption, Fulton and City of Atlanta.
Stacey, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I apologize. We're not seeing your screen. I know you're trying to show we are seeing a screen, but I don't think the slides you're meant to be showing.
Try this. Thank you for letting me know. I was just going along showing everything.
I apologize.
So let me stop share and then start again. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we'll just start from here. And if we need to, I'll circle back to some of the earlier slides. So, you can see at the bottom here is the 2018 tax bill with the benefits from the exemptions. 2019, they adopted the floating exemption. And so when she got her 2019 bill, the floating exemption used the base year from 2017. So it was lower than that 2018 value. And because of that, it cut her tax bill almost in half. So you can see that it makes a huge difference. Without having actually applied for or gotten any additional exemptions, she was able to reduce her tax bill just because of the changes they made in the existing exemptions. So this is where, having additional exemptions, especially the county and city ones, can really make a huge difference. Okay, so let's talk about who is eligible for the exemptions. And again, this is where I really want to share with you that more people should be getting them. I'm guilty of it too. So when I talk about homestead exemptions, I always say, like the homeowner can get this. And the general lingo is the person who owns the home and lives in it is eligible for homestead exemptions. It's actually a little bit broader than that. This bona fide claim to ownership actually includes a little bit more. Someone with a deed in their name definitely is eligible. That is pretty clear. No one questions that. They'll usually, they'll accept the application and process it and you'll get it. And there usually is no problems with that kind. And that's true even if you're not the only name on the deed. So, even if you share ownership with other people who don't live in the home, you can still get the homestead exemption for your home. The exception to that, there is an exception for spouses, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Someone with a life estate is also eligible. So even though there's not a deed that gives them full ownership, the fact that they have a life estate is enough. The person with a contract for purchase of the home, where the contract actually would end with them owning the home, they are eligible for the homestead exemption. So this is like a contract for deed, lease to purchase, that sort of thing. They should still be eligible for that homestead exemption. A person who resides in a home owned by a parent who is deceased or incapacitated is eligible for the homestead exemption regardless of whether the estate is probated, or regardless of whether the estate is distributed, is the way the law says. So what that means is if the estate had been distributed, then there would be a deed giving the title to whoever is, owning it. So, this is clearly indicating that they want someone who, even though they don't have a deed in their name, they should still be able to get the exemptions. And this is also true for someone who resides in a home that he or she will inherit, but the home is being probated. So, there's currently an executor or an administrator. They're going through the process of doing the probate. The heirs or beneficiaries should still be eligible for that homestead exemption. So, these are really key to be able to keep the exemptions going while the estate is being probated, because, it takes time, and you don't want someone to lose their home just because they're going through this process and they can't afford the taxes during this process. A person who resides in a home that is in a trust and that person is a beneficiary under the trust is also eligible for the homestead exemption. They need to show the trust. And the spouse of a homeowner who lives in the home where the homeowner spouse lives somewhere else is eligible for the homestead exemption, but they can only get one exemption. And this is what I was saying, that the big exception to everyone being able to get an exemption for the home that they own is when you have spouses. Spouses can only get one exemption. Even if the spouses are separated, own their separate homes, live in their separate places, only one of them is going to be able to get the homestead exemption. So, again, just want to reiterate that this is broader than just you own your home and live in it. So that's sort of the catchphrase that we use that sort of incorporates all of these things. You must live in the home. There are, again, some exceptions to that, if you're out of the home due to health reasons. So like if you're in a nursing home or a hospital or something like that, you're still eligible for homestead exemption. If you're away for military service, then you can still get it. If there's like a flood, fire, something where the home is uninhabitable, you have a year to get it fixed and get back into it, and you're still eligible for homestead exemption. And if the spouse lives in the home, again, only one of them can get the exemption, but a spouse living in the home or the children can get the exemption. So in order to get the exemptions, you're going to need to apply. And in applying, you're going to need to provide some documentation to show you're eligible for the exemptions. The first thing they're going to want is your ID, just to prove who you are. They're also going to want to see the registration for all your vehicles. And Georgia law requires that all the vehicles be registered at the homestead property. So you want to be sure that they're registered there when you're applying. You're also going to need to provide proof of ownership. Now, if you have a deed in your name and it's been, you've had that for a long time, then the tax office may already have your name in their records, and you may not need to show your recorded deed. But if you are a new homeowner where it's just been recently purchased and it's a new deed and it's not yet showing up in the tax records, you may need to show that recorded deed. Or if you're in one of those categories where you don't actually have a deed in your name, you're going to need to show the recorded deed of who actually is the last person that's in the deed records to show who owns it, and then how you connect to that person for your eligibility. So for example, if you're applying as the child of a deceased homeowner or deceased parent, then you're going to want to show the death certificate, the recorded deed to your parent, the death certificate for that parent, your birth certificate show you're the child of that parent, and anything else to show that you're eligible. If it's that you're inheriting the property, you're going to want to show, the probate documents, the will, whatever, to show that you're inheriting the property from this deceased homeowner. For the trust or the life saving, things like that, you're going to want to show whatever documents you have to show that you are eligible for the exemptions. Also, if you're doing one of the exemptions, like the senior exemptions that require income information, you're going to need to provide that. So like for senior exemptions, you're going to need to show proof of age, which probably will be on your ID anyway, but if not, then you'll want to show the proof of age and proof of your income. And that's going to be your tax returns. If you file tax returns, if you don't file your tax returns, then it's going to be your award letters or whatever to prove what your income is. Okay, the deadline. You have to get everything submitted by April 1st. April 1st is the deadline. Now, occasionally some local jurisdictions will have slightly different dates, but by Georgia law, basically it says that the deadline for filing for the homestead exemptions is the date for closing the books for the return of property taxes, which in Georgia law is set out as April 1st. So April 1st is going to be your deadline. Now, if you do not file by April 1st, you're not going to get the exemption for the current year. You can still file at any time during the year, but April 1st is going to be the cutoff for being able to get it for this year. There are some exceptions to that. For the most part, it requires you to notify the tax office that you fit one of these exceptions. So it's probably just easier to just go ahead and file the application. The applications, most counties, I think now have online exemption applications, or at least a lot of them do. So, even if you can't physically go into the office, you should hopefully be able to do it online or get someone to help you. There's also paper applications that you can file, either mail them in or take them in to the tax office, or you can actually go to the tax office in person and file for these exemptions. But do it by April 1st. You want to be sure that when you file that you get proof that you actually did file by the deadline. And the reason for this is if there's any question later, then it may be a question of whether you get the exemption for this year or next year, or they just have lost it entirely. So you want to be sure that, like, if you're doing it by mail, you want to be sure that you're mailing it in a way that you can track when you put it in the mail and that they received it. If you're doing it online, most of the online systems are going to have an automatic thing that says that, congratulations, you've submitted your application. So you want to be sure to keep copies of those things. If you go in person, ask to get some sort of proof that you actually did file for it. If they refuse to take the application, which is a problem that we have here in Fulton County, push for them to try and push for them to take it. And if they don't, just try and make sure that you can document that you actually did go in, or if they won't take it, you can always go back and apply online or by paper, so that, they don't have any sort of luxury of saying, oh, no, we're not going to take that. But you do want to try and get proof that you actually did do it by the deadline. If you are not approved for your exemption, then you want to be sure to appeal that denial. And the key is going to be, what's in your notice of assessment. So if your notice of assessment does not show the exemption you applied for, you want to be sure to appeal that. Sometimes I know with Fulton County, particularly, they have such a huge caseload of applications that sometimes they're still processing them when the notice of assessment comes out, but that's still your time to appeal. So what I would say is if it's not there, even if they're processing it, I would appeal it, and then you can withdraw the appeal once they approve the exemption. So what is the notice of assessment? This is a sample of a notice of assessment. Again, this is a Fulton County one, but there's sort of standards that all counties have to meet statewide. So they're all going to look kind of similar to this. They're going to have the same basic information. And so you're going to want to look to see where the exemption status is. So in this case, you can see that it says homestead exemption, yes, HF01. Yes means that, yes, there is an exemption. And then that code means the type of exemption. HF01, I know, is the basic exemption, but it, if it's some other code, I can't even tell you what the different codes mean. So if you're not sure if the code is for the right exemption, then you want to call the tax office and ask them, is this the right thing that I'm getting? If it says no, then it means that you're not getting the exemption. And so if you've applied for an exemption and it says no, you want to appeal. If you applied for a specialty exemption and it's just showing the basic, then you want to appeal. The deadline to appeal is going to be listed up in the top right-hand corner here. And again, I think this is probably going to be true in most notices of assessment. They all have to show the date the notice was issued and the appeal deadline. The appeal deadline is going to be 45 days from the date it was issued. That is not the date that you received it. Even if you don't receive it, that is the deadline. So you want to be very aware when these notices of assessment come out and be sure to appeal if you have any cause for the appeal by that deadline. Because this is also the thing that you would use to appeal the value, I want to point out that you want to pay attention to the value that they have. They should show the previous year's value and the current year's proposed value. And they're going to show both the fair market value and then also that taxable value. If there's a big increase between last year and this year, you want to think about appealing that to try and keep it from going up too quickly. They'll also give you an estimated taxes due. So sort of an estimated tax bill. It's not a bill. It's not necessarily what's going to be on your tax bill, but it's what they do is they take last year's millage rates, last year's tax rates, and use the new value to give you an idea of what last year's tax bill would have looked like if you were getting this, this increase. So that way you can kind of think about, is it worth appealing based on the change in my taxes? Now, keep in mind that when your tax bill comes out, it may be different. And by the time your tax bill comes out, it is too late to appeal. The tax bills are not going to come out in the next 45 days after you get this. So you want to be sure that you appeal by that deadline if you are afraid that your taxes are not going to be affordable. Okay, so I want very quickly, I want to talk about the appeals. Basically, tax appeals are a place to challenge the homestead exemption, but also a place to argue for a lower total value in order to lower the taxable value. So you want to be sure to appeal if the exemption is not there, or if you think that the total value should be lower. You have to appeal within 45 days. That date does change from year to year. There's no set time when the notice of assessment comes out. It can vary pretty widely in Fulton County. I think some other counties are a little bit more, able to get them out quickly because they have probably fewer to do. The advantage of doing a value appeal is that it will freeze the value for 3 years. If you go to the Board of Equalization, or if there's an agreement between you and the assessor's office that whatever value they end up with is going to have that 3-year freeze. And what that means is that whatever value is the end result of your tax appeal, that value is going to stay for the year appealed and the 2 following years. So for 3 years, you'll have that value. It's not going to go up for the next couple of years. And then once that freeze in, and then it'll adjust back to what they think the fair market value is, and you're going to appeal again. A lot of people are afraid to take it to the Board of Equalization because they think that a hearing is going to be scary. It's not. The Board of Equalization is basically just 3 taxpayers, just like you, who are hearing these appeals. They're listening to you and the tax assessor's office to try and figure out which one has a better argument for what the value should be. Often they'll come with something between the 2. So, it's not something that's really scary. It's not a real formal process. It's worth trying. Again, if nothing else, you're going to freeze it so that you're not going to have an increase for the following 2 years. You do want to be sure, though, to give them something to hang their hat on. You want to present evidence that supports that lower value. You want to show something that shows that the value of your house should be lower. Something about like condition of the house or other houses in the neighborhood that would justify a lower value, so that you can give them something to show that this should be lower. It is not enough just to go in there and say that I can't afford these taxes. Unfortunately, that is not a grounds for the appeal. So this is a good graphic just sort of explaining what you're doing in an appeal. I actually found this on Facebook, so it's appropriate, I guess, that I share it on Facebook. So the goal of an appeal is to present evidence that convinces the Board of Equalization that your home value is more like what you think it is than what they think it is, which in many cases is some big mansion that you don't have. So that's kind of just a good visual of what the goal of a tax appeal is. Now back to sort of the homestead exemption piece, there are a couple of tax deferral options that are out there in Georgia law. I'm not going to go into much detail because they're very restricted, because the income for this is pretty low, and it's based on your entire income, like the whole household income, all the Social Security, all the income for anyone in the household. So not as many people qualify for these deferral options. Also, they're limited to if the tax liens and any mortgage or anything like that ends up being more than 85% of the value of the property, then you're no longer eligible for these deferrals. But if you can get the deferral, if you are not able to pay your taxes, it does allow the lien to accrue interest at a lower rate than it would normally. But again, the better way is to try and lower the taxes so they're affordable if you can. This is an option. So just to recap, the homestead exemption is subtracted from the taxable value, so it has a direct impact on how much you pay in taxes. You have to apply, and you do have to reapply if there's any change in your eligibility. So as you age, you need to be sure to go back and reapply for any additional exemptions that you might be eligible for. Or if you fall into one of those other categories, you want to be sure to go back and reapply for those exemptions. For most exemptions, there is no need to reapply for the exemption you're currently getting. As long as you remain eligible, it just continues on and you just keep getting it. But there are a few local exemptions that do expire. There was a WSB story recently about a lovely woman that was in danger of losing her home because Fulton County has one exemption for seniors who are 65 or older to, it's a 65 or older low income exemption, but you have to reapply for it every 2 years. And so, if you're in one that does expire, you want to be sure to go back and reapply for those. But if you're in one that doesn't expire, as long as you remain eligible, you should be able to keep getting it. You do need, if you become ineligible for an exemption, you are supposed to notify the tax office of that change. The deadline is April 1st to be able to get the exemption for the current year. Again, you can go in later and apply at any time during the year. It's just that after April 1st, it's going to be applied to the following year. You should appeal if you're denied, or if you're not allowed to apply, you need to appeal in order to try and push them to agree that you should be getting the exemptions that you're eligible to get. But you may have to go to a Board of Equalization hearing to convince them of that. Sally, do we have any questions so far?
Hey, we do have one question. Ash is asking, I have limited warranty deed, which was included in my buyer docs when I closed on my home. Is this the same as a recorded deed?
So the limited warranty deed just is the type of deed. Recorded is, presumably when you close on the home, they actually probably took it to the county records and had it recorded in the county records. It should have some recording information on it. If it doesn't, then you should be able to get a copy of it from the county records. Again, if you've had that deed for a while, then the tax office probably already has you in the system as the owner. But if you don't, then you may have to go and track down that recorded deed. Again, recorded just means that each county superior court keeps the deed records, and so when you buy a home, your deed gets sent off to them to record, and then it gets sent back with the recording information on it. So, any other questions?
Yes. John says, I'm 65 and low income. I pay Fulton County and Alpharetta city tax. What exemptions do I qualify for?
So Fulton County actually has a 65 or older exemption regardless of income. They also have a few that are for low income. So I can't tell you exactly which ones you're eligible for without sitting down and talking through what your income is and all that. And I'm not going to do that right now. But you should be able to get some exemptions, and you could even get the one that expires every 2 years will actually zero out the Fulton County taxes. And then as far as city of Alpharetta, you would have to check the city. I don't keep track of all the cities. There's so many cities in the Fulton County. Well, really, there's so many cities in Georgia, especially in Fulton County, that I don't keep track of which ones have what. Some cities will rely on the county exemptions, and some cities will have their own. Some cities will rely on the county application process. Some will require you to come to them to apply for some of the specialty exemptions, especially. So just, what I would say is check with the city about those exemptions.
Thank you. So Mary has said, my husband passed 3 months ago. Both of our names are on the homestead exemption paperwork from Fulton County. Do I have to reapply in my name only?
It's not a bad idea to apply. So one of the weird things is that the homestead exemption is personal. So whoever's name it is in, that is the person who has the exemption. And technically when the person passes away, their exemption should end. So once somebody passes away, it's a good idea to go ahead and show that you're also eligible for those exemptions. Now for spouses, there is a provision that protects them from having the exemptions removed. That if they get a notice saying that the exemption is going to be removed, they have 30 days to show that they actually are still eligible for those exemptions and get it reinstated. It's not considered a waiver. So even if you don't do it by April 1st, that should allow it to continue. But it's still, just to be on the safe side, go ahead and go in there and explain what's going on and that you're still eligible, and make sure you're getting all the exemptions you should get.
It looks like just one last question, and that is, and that's just for me, is where can people find applications? Like, is there one standard application, or should people go to their county websites to find them for exemptions?
Great question. So the Department of Revenue does have sort of an overall exemption application on their website. It's really complicated though. Most counties, well, each county is supposed to have their own. And so most counties will do one that's more simplified than the one the Department of Revenue puts out. So definitely check with your county tax office to find out what the application looks like, and how to go about doing the application. Like I said, a lot of counties will let you do it online. And most of them you should be able to just print out the application and mail it in if you'd rather do that, or you can go in. Some counties do require, for some of the senior exemptions and things like that, they require you to go in, which to me seems counterintuitive that you can apply for the basic online, but you have to go in for the senior exemptions or disabled exemptions. So, but definitely check with your county to see what the process is for doing the applications.
I think that is all the questions that we have for now. Thank you so much, Stacy.
Sure. Let me just quickly show you. This is the sort of timeline for the sort of property tax year. These dates are geared towards Fulton County, but this is true for all counties. And I mostly want to point out that ownership starts as of January 1st. So if you become the owner of the property on January 2nd, you're going to have to wait till the following year to apply for the homestead exemption. Or if you become eligible for one of the higher ones after that date, then you're going to have to wait till the following year to get those higher exemptions. You're going to have to apply by April 1st. Sometime after April 1st, there's going to be the notice of assessment coming out. Then there's only 45 days. And I want to point out that 45 days ends before your tax bill comes out. So, even though this again is set up for based on an estimate of Fulton tax year, all of them are going to be, that deadline is going to be before your tax bill comes out. So you want to be sure to appeal before that deadline. And then we want to avoid tax foreclosure. The key is to make sure that the taxes are affordable when they're due. This sort of runs through what the tax foreclosure process is. The liens get issued, there's a levy, a tax foreclosure, you have a right to redeem. At that point, it becomes a lot more expensive, but if you are able to pay to redeem, then you get to redeem it. If you don't, then eventually they can foreclose that right to redeem and you lose the home. So the key here again is to make sure that the taxes are affordable when they're due, to try and be sure to apply for those homestead exemptions, appeal those taxes, whatever you can do to make sure that you keep the tax bill within the realm that you can afford. And that's the end. Any other questions?
Nope, I think we are all done. Thank you so much to everybody who watched, and thank you so much to Stacey. That's really important information and a great presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you all for attending.